Good morning and welcome. My name is Samuel Fritchie. I have two master's degrees, for whatever that's worth. I used to be a teacher. Then I became a nutritionist. My story with type 1 diabetes, I was teaching English in South Korea when I was diagnosed at the age of 23. I was given sort of a very, I don't want to say bad, I was at a Western hospital. I had a 15-minute meeting with my endocrinologist. I was given an exchange diet pamphlet, and I was with, maybe 10 minutes with a nurse. She showed me how to inject into an orange, and then I went into the bathroom to inject myself with insulin for the first time. I couldn't make it through one class teaching English without having a low. So I know we're all, sharing in that trauma a little bit, of feeling left alone or in a place that's different. And oftentimes we want accelerated growth rates for things in life that are a burden for us. If our father is a carpenter, we want to become a really good carpenter like him. Or if our father was, something bad, then we want to become a police officer or a doctor. If someone in our family was sick, I wanted to help with type 1 diabetes. So I came back to the States, got my degree in nutrition, but I found out about this beautiful nutrition program that was fully online, and I ended up getting both master's degrees concurrently. And when I went to go, do I open practice as a nutritionist? Do I become a teacher? After two and a half years getting my nutrition degree, I just, right at the end of it, I stumbled upon this class, which was a muscle testing class. It was called Autonomic Response Testing. I didn't know what it was, but, just like I was researching nutrition and food, and while I was still in Korea, I was writing this blog about processed food industry stuff, and I'm like, why do we get this type 1 diabetes, and why are you eating genetically modified food, Mom, and, how dare you use a non-natural, detergent, very stressful, or EMF, EMF exposure. I ended up building a tiny home that had no chemicals in it, and I got rid of the solar panels one year and lived without power. And the only thing, even with batteries, that came into that home was my glucometer. So that was an interesting time. And also was very, very Bernstein, very into the low carb thing. So, we try to resolve our burdens with these accelerated growth rates, as I was saying. But, when you have all these ideas as a nutritionist, I think you should eat this way, I think you should go on this diet, you should do this, maybe you have gluten, maybe you have this, maybe you have this, maybe you have this. There's like 100,000 ideas to link together, and we don't know which one of them applies in a beautiful way, let alone an elegant one. So we go from practitioner to practitioner, and idea to idea, and blog to blog, and so when I just happened to come to a muscle testing class, it was Autonomic Response Testing, Dietrich Klinghart's work, because I had been researching autism, which is, like type 1 diabetes, one of these we don't know why, and it's exponentially increasing types of things, and I wanted to really study suffering and modern world, and toxicologically induced illnesses, and kind of radical health stuff. So one of the big names in the autism field, and also the Lyme disease field, is Dietrich Klinghardt. So I went to the class, not knowing what it was, and I learned that we can test every theory that I'd spent the last 2.5 years studying. So as I got more and more into this, aside from testing my body, when I go to the grocery store, I test every food. I have this banana here. If it's in my house, that means I went to the store and it tested positive for me. There's nothing in my house that I would buy that doesn't test positive. And that became an interesting radar to have with self-muscle testing, which looks like there's a bunch of different O-ring kind of, they have stuff like this, stuff where you put your hand on your heart, lean forward or back. And we're going to explain what all those mean, what is muscle testing, why is it doing that, and why do I feel like I'm getting bad readings for those who've learned it, and, how do I get enough confidence to actually use it, because I still don't know, so we'll get there. This is a primer. So with self-testing, it's really instantly applicable and useful. And at one of the seminars, Dr. Klinghardt, he talked about, this being kind of the only system in the world where you can dose somebody's insulin. I'm like, he's talking about insulin? He's like, yeah, you have a patient whose blood sugar is high, it's like 570, and you can dose precisely the amount of insulin to give them. The body responds and says yes. So what does that look like? Just as a baseline primer, I prepared a few syringes with insulin in them. One has one has two. If I add these together, I can count the impact of 3 units, and the other one has 15. Right? So of course, if you're watching this, you're type 1 diabetic. What would taking 15 units of my bolus do to me right now? Right? So if I count these, again, we use a countable muscle testing system. That 15 units causes this like massive stress. It causes a weak state. So my reading goes basically, by my testing, -8 or worse. -8 or worse. And you can't just do this. You have to learn a few points, like each person might have to use different fingers. We're counting, and then we go to the next. So I count this finger, which is my standard finger, and it is weak when I use my strongest finger. And then I use a weaker finger, and it's still weak. And an even weaker finger, and it's still weak. And then I go to even a stronger. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. I used one finger, and it's weak with this insulin. And then I add a second finger. Sorry, don't take away the second finger, and it's still. Then I add 3 fingers, and it's still weak. And then I go to an even stronger finger, and it's still going weaker and weaker. Whereas if I test, I don't think I need any insulin right now. If I test my 2 units, it still goes weak, but it's only -3. So taking 2 units is like a sort of bad idea right now, but it's nowhere near as detrimental as taking 15 units. And then one of the things we're going to learn to do, if I take the banana and add that, and one of the questions is, how do we add that? How do we expose it? There's a few ways. One of them is pointing at it. So the hand, like if you touch a hot surface, like you don't have to, the hand has a lot of sensory receptive input. When we touch something, we can feel it. The nervous system is heightened when we're perceiving something with our hand rather than the back of the neck. So using the hand is an appropriate way to test. There's other devices, this is a signal enhancer. You know how prisms, when light goes through a prism, it goes in 3 different directions or whatever, and divides the color. All of the molecules in the signal enhancer are perfectly evenly spaced. So when I put the banana on the signal enhancer, the light from the banana is amplified. So that's some German little trick. So if I put the banana, let's see if I can do it so you can see it, on the signal enhancer, I'm exposing my body to that. That tests negative for me right now. -1, -2, and it's -2. Now I'm going to add 1 unit. It's only -1 now. And I'm going to add 2 units. And it's +3. And if I add 3 units, it goes negative again. So I'm guessing that my dose is somewhere around 1.5 to 2.5 units. Normally I can be just a little bit more precise because I can draw insulin in, test it, add just a little bit more, test it, add just a little bit more, test it. And some of us, if we're on a low carb thing, or for whatever, you're a honeymooner, you're highly insulin sensitive, it's going to behoove you to dose based on 1/4 of a unit, whatever the smallest and most precise dose that you can. So using this, there's still a little bit of insulin math error, and there's still human error, and there's still all these other things. So you should be testing this, and I'm not giving you, I'm not here to give medical advice on how you should select insulin dosage. That you have to decide with your doctor and use your carb ratios and all that. It's just kind of an informative guide, so that kind of caveat said, I would feel perfectly comfortable if you put in front of me a bowl of mashed potatoes, 3 bananas, let's say something ridiculous like the mastering diabetes people do. You put in front of me a meal of 100 grams or more of like just fruit, something like that. I would feel perfectly confident. Excuse me. So, I would feel really confident in that. If I, in a more day-to-day level, when I wake up and I go to take, say, a correction dose, I take I split my basal, so I've got morning and night. I'm still on MDI. You obviously can't do this with a pump. In the morning, I'm using this, and in general, once I'm at the right dose of my basal, it's about the same every day. But every once in a while, it's a little bit higher, and every once in a while, it's a little bit lower. So I'm always kind of calibrating to those seasonal shifts. I think something in me wants to say that if it's likely that something funny will happen for the day, like funny, I end up eating something with more carbs in it than I thought, or some kind of surprise happens, or something out of the realm of normalcy. I'm invited to go somewhere, and I decide I'm going to dose and cover eating more carbs than I normally would. It's my experience that almost predictively, I'll muscle test for a higher dose in the morning, and I'm like, I don't know, that's strange, but I try to go ahead and do it. One of the things that gave me an incentive to record this, and I had the idea that I should record this and probably maybe in a little bit more of a formal way, where putting my suit and tie on and, people there and doing demonstrations, muscle testing for whatever. But one of the incentives was the other day I made the mistake, my bolus insulin was in the place where my basal insulin normally goes, and it was dark, and I grabbed, because my basal insulin is always there, I grabbed it and injected a really high dose of my bolus. And, for some of us, this wrecks half the day, and, if they do it at night, they go to the hospital, and disaster, and maybe it would have been a little bit worse if I didn't split my basals, but I don't know, I simply... First I saw, because I had to check, that was one of the, frustrating things. Here's our type 1 diabetes. I had to really make sure, did I actually do that mistake? Because it was like 10 minutes later, and I saw my bolus insulin was there for my, and I'm like, did I just take the wrong insulin? And I had, so I waited till I saw that my blood sugar was coming down, and it was coming down. And I went and grabbed my honey, and I started, pouring. I was like, okay, do I need this much, this much, this much, this much? And there's like this pile of honey there, and I'm like, man, I really must have. And I took it, and it was fine. And actually, it was funny because normally when you do something like that, you're like, it came up. Naturally, that means I overdid it, and it's going to go too high. So just a little bit too early, without thinking, I took a little bit extra insulin. It dipped a little bit down again. I took a little bit more honey, and then, and when it finally went up, I believe because I had to add the honey the second time, and it messed up my original rhythm. When it came up, I think the lowest it got was like mid-60s. When I saw that it was going low, it was probably 70s, 72, something like that. It didn't go much lower. So when it finally came up, it was like 150, 155 might have been the highest that I went, something like that. And it leveled up around there, maybe a little bit high for me. And I let it sit there, mainly because I was, distracted and doing other things, and I could have muscle tested just a little bit earlier. I went ahead and too early took insulin when it was still like, I think barely when it was getting to 80, because I thought it was already going to go up, but then it already passes 120 and 130, and I'm too lazy to look at it and see, is it going to keep on going higher? I should probably, but no, it leveled around 150. So I think that's pretty good. I think that's really good. That's awesome. For obviously taking the wrong insulin, which can be life-threatening or a disaster. If I had a job interview that day, I would have felt confident to go to that job interview without a problem, So one of the things you'll see that we can do is, you've got your insulin on the right, your sugar on the left, and you can start counting out candy. I'm a holistic nutritionist. I can't advise you eating Skittles with the food colorings and genetically modified processed ingredients and but whatever, we'll use the idea of Skittles. You start counting out. Is it one Skittle? No, I don't need one Skittle. Insulin, is it 1 unit? Yeah, so maybe try on the insulin side. And it is remarkable. It's just remarkable for your quality of life. So that's why I'm making this available here. I'm going to give a safety note and just a little bit, I'm going to give a little bit of a firmer pitch to like how very safe and beautiful this program has been for me. But I'm thinking a little bit like Juicebox podcast. So Juicebox podcast, there's all these camps in type 1 diabetes, Bernstein, we have vegan keto, we have mastering diabetes, the low fat, increase your insulin sensitivity kind of stuff. We have Think Like a Pancreas. Ostensibly, there's lots of different movements here. Most of them are, low carb, and then there's some, other wingnutty, other categories that, I don't mean wingnutty in a derogatory term. I have a love for the holistic, and I'm not trying to tease here. But sometimes you gotta, go for a more wignutty thing. Like, I just can't do the bacon and eggs anymore. I'm not gonna do it. So there tends to be, sympathy for all these different, ideas, and sometimes it can be a little bit hard. But Juicebox podcast, he calls his, theme the primary contribution. He's been doing this podcast for years. He calls it being bold with insulin, and this is using the Dexcom, and he's got Omnipod on this cell phone. And for loopers and more technological people, you can say you have a child with type 1 diabetes. You can dose them at a distance. You can do all kinds of you can monitor them all the time. So um, being bold with insulin is like, let's keep the CGM line a little bit tighter. Let's not wait till we go to 180 to take a correction. So the upper alarm is set for something like 130. And it's like, well, I want to know if I'm heading towards 150 or 160. And so already when it's at 130, if it's like on a curve where it's going up, I'm going to take insulin. And it's not a thing where you're like stressing about it. It's like, oh, yeah, went up to 130. Boom, boom. On the Omnipod or whatever pump. Boom, boom. You know, I'm going to correct that down a little bit. Going low, bring it back up. And using this, they're eating, fairly. It's not a carb-free diet plan. That's not what they're doing. That's not what they're after. It's more like living a reasonable life. And oh yeah, there's a problem here. Going low, take insulin, or take sugar, come up. There's a problem going high. Take insulin, come down a little bit. And that whole check-in process should be really quick. The whole thing of getting to 200, if you're trying to maintain a 5 range A1C, getting to 200 is like, oh, I got to 200, and the stress of doing that, and everything else. So what I'm advising is much like that, casual, carefree, constant monitoring, and applying the technology you've got really well. So if I was doing bold with insulin, after the meal, I'd see, okay, I'm 130. Let me go test to see if my body wants insulin. Shit, why not? And that's cool also, because if you have this extra step there, you can count the amount that you need. It's like, well, I only needed half a unit or whatever, not a big deal. But you get to 130 and like, my body wants, whatever, some, let's say, I'll use it, my body wants 16 units. My body wants 20 units, right? And you're going high. What would that mean? Body wants 30 units, 40 units. Like, why would my body want 40 units of bolus? Your insulin went bad. It was frozen or heated or destroyed. It's lost its potency. It's gone past 30 days, whatever it is. It's lost its potency, which explains not only why your blood sugar was rising, but also why you're testing for a massive dose. So that was why you were going up. Let's say it's a little bit more reasonable. You're going high, you hit 130. It's like, oh yeah, my body wants 3 units right now, or, depending what your carb ratios are, 6 units, something moderate, reasonable. But and then okay, yeah, definitely messed up the math on that one. That was a little bit more carbs than I counted for, or my carb ratio was wrong. One of the best tests you can do with muscle testing, I like daily stability programs. So if you're really trying to get on a good program, then in the morning, maybe for 6-7 days, a week at a time, say I'm going to eat the same meals 3 times a day, right? This sounds crazy, but if you think about it, like in a wider way, like a common lunch for me would be like a tofu curry with spinach greens and a hemp seed chia, grain alternative kind of thing, pretty low carb. So that might be a thing for me, and it's like, yeah, I could change the spices and the whatever. I can add some different vegetables slightly and whatever. But do that every day for a week. And how early did I need to take my insulin? And doing this with the muscle testing for insulin, you can really hone in on what the correct carb ratio is. When you take the meal, you dose how many units your body wanted. You see whether or not that worked right, and troubleshooting is basically fourth video, and all of this is about troubleshooting, because it's not like we're testing a supplement to see if it's good for us. We're testing insulin, which is life or death, getting it right or wrong, which is why it's especially important that you work with your doctor. I'm not your doctor, and this is supposed to be educational or fun, and don't consider me to be an advice giver here and saying you should do this. And I'm saying whatever, you can inform your experience and make your own decisions. So based on what you find. Yeah, so that's a good part of the learning model, is doing the same meals and practicing each day, and not only to see if you're getting your carb ratios right, but also to see if you're muscle testing correctly, meaning was it the same every day? And then you can also look at those outside factors, like, yeah, I was running, a half hour before breakfast, and I did need a little bit less insulin. And then when I was sitting on the couch watching TV for 4 hours, my normal dose for dinner, that wasn't right. That wasn't good, and so exercise is a good one too. I should mention, if you're going to exercise, candy in your pocket, and just, be there, start counting out, do I need 1 piece of candy, 2 pieces of candy, 3 pieces of candy, or whatever sugar it is you're using. And, you get a little bit better at eyeing the when you're muscle testing, like the banana. I can be amazingly precise, so you get a little bit better, and I think it's like almost like I'm sensing this part of the banana, but not this part, and kind of draw your line, but that's like a little bit more intuitive and just for fun. Technically, to do a proper muscle test, you should cut the exact amount of the banana that you want and use that for your testing. Okay, I was going to tell my story, and this should make you feel just a lot safer. What's the experiment that I did? So when I first got into muscle testing for insulin, I was amazed and astounded that I was getting correct levels. I would eat some meal, I would test the exact dose, and my postprandial spike would be something like 120, and then it would settle back down to 90, and I'm like, man, this is amazing. This is really cool. And I was, going for those tighter kind of values, and I didn't mess up. And as I've been saying, I went low, and I took the exact amount of carbs, and predictively, I tested that I was going to go low. I wasn't feeling like I was low, but I went and tested. My body wanted a whole bunch of sugar, and I ate the amount that my body wanted, blind on faith, and, thinking that it's going to fail, and it worked correctly. So gradually, I got into not using a meter, a glucometer, and this was not laziness. This was, I wanted to, place my bet and say, I believe that this works. I didn't think it was possible. I'm going to place my bet. I think it's possible. And I gradually got into doing that, living that way more and more. And I would say at first I went for a whole month without checking my blood sugar. And after I did, I remember it was like after I'd eaten, was feeling steady, and it had been like some hours had gone by, and so maybe like a few hours after eating or something like that, and I'm like, I bet I'm 110 right now, and I went and checked it, and it was like 105, and just stable as could be. So but wait, there's more. So the original 1 month experiment turned into another 2 or 3 month trial, where during that time I would randomly check myself. Like I would check myself on a random morning and see if it was right. And part of this, I wish, see, this was like 2013 2013, and CGMs were there, but not like they are now. I'm wearing a Libra on my arm, and if you told who I was in 2013, hey Sam, you're gonna wear one of these technological devices and have a phone around you all the time, and I would not have believed you because I didn't like that stuff. So kind of fought with that and decided that's better for me right now. But this wasn't that wasn't necessarily all that accessible then, unless you're paying all kinds of money. So it wasn't really possible to do it blind with a CGM, which I think would have been really cool to do like a full. Of course, there's no way, since I'm doing it myself, not under supervision, to make it, science proof or something like that. But I think it would have been nice to have more numbers, and to have used the glucometer. But part of what I really needed to do that research was literally to not look, and not see what my blood sugar was, and see if I was still giving myself good advice. Like sometimes I would take my insulin dose and check my blood sugar afterwards and see if it made sense, but it's like not, it's only sort of useful. So, okay, but wait, there's more. Aside from this 2 to 3 month time of testing on myself randomly, like pop quiz style, it later came to a time where I think it was like the bulk of 3 years. The bulk of 3 years, I rarely tested my blood sugar. The bulk of 3 years. During different times in this period, I tested more. Sometimes I tested less. I did find that if I wasn't tying my muscle testing to numbers, I would allow myself to be a little bit higher. During this time, there were periods where I even did this using R and N, which was crazy, and coming out fine. So right now, using the muscle testing with my CGM, there were some issues that when I look back on, I really, if I had checked and used with the muscle testing, I could have gotten my nighttime line flatter, but there was no real way for me to know that it was a problem, so I didn't take it that seriously. So I'm not suggesting you go on big meterless experiments here. What I am saying is, you can do it, and it was safe, and I didn't have any dramatic lows or highs, never ended up in DKA. There's no tragedies whatsoever. Yeah, like totally fine. The average number of times that I would go low in a week was like, I could feel my lows, and maybe like a casual, oh yeah, I feel like I'm going low, and grab something, a no big deal kind of low. Maybe, that would happen, something, especially in the R and N days, that can very easily happen, but more or less pretty awesome. But what I wish I had done was calibrated what I was doing with the muscle testing with data from blood sugar. So yeah, you don't need to be the wild explorer that I was, and I'm suggesting definitely you use this to you use this with the data from your meters as much as possible, maybe even more so. Even though I lived without and I felt safe in it, I look back and I was like, I could have got this better. I could have got this better. My A1C did go higher, and then when I found out that my A1C had gone higher, I made changes using the muscle testing and brought it down. I think my Libra is saying that my average blood sugar right now is somewhere like 108, something like that, and I've only been on this is my first time using CGM. I've only been on it for a month. So those are some thoughts. Let's leave this for the first video. After this, we're going to get straight into techniques and stuff to avoid, and what you need to know to muscle test your insulin dose.